Jesse Weber, and welcome back to Law and Crime Live. This is where we go live into courtrooms throughout the country in real time. We cover the most interesting cases around the country. Now, before we begin, and we have a busy day today, I want to tell our new listeners on Sirius XM Radio, thank you so much for joining us. We're so happy to have you here, so welcome. Now, let's get into it, what we're covering right now. We're going to be live first in the Shawn Great case out of Ohio. There are closing arguments in this case. This is about that alleged serial killer who's on trial for numerous crimes, including the murders of 2 women and the abduction and rape of a 3rd. Now, last week, this man pled guilty to 15 of the 23 charges, but he did not plead guilty to the murder charges, which means the death penalty can still be on the table. We are going to cover that live. Closing arguments are today. Now, again, we are also going to be covering the William Riley Gall case out of Tennessee. Many of you have been following this case as well. This is about that former Maryville College football player who is on trial for allegedly stalking and killing his 16-year-old ex-girlfriend, Emma Walker, who was a high school cheerleader at the time of her death. It's alleged that Gall fired 2 shots through Walker's bedroom wall while she slept, with one of those shots hitting her right in the head, killing her instantaneously. Now, Gall was arrested. He's charged with many different things, including first-degree murder, stalking, theft of property. So there's a lot at stake here for this young man. We are going to continue our coverage of that. Now, before we begin, I want to play a short report for you about the Shawn Great case. This is when Jane Doe, the woman who is allegedly was abducted and raped by Shawn Great, she provided testimony to the courtroom. She actually testified. Here's a short report from about that.
The surviving victim, who escaped from a suspected serial killer by calling the police while he slept, took the stand. The unidentified victim described how she first met with the defendant, Shawn Great, who is accused of kidnapping and sexually assaulting her and is charged in connection with the murders of 2 other women.
What's the problem? I've been abducted. Who abducted you? Shawn Great. Where's she at now? Asleep.
She claimed Great was like an older brother to her before he snapped.
So when he started pulling the Bible from my hands, I just looked up like curious, like, what are you doing? And that's when he says, you're not going anywhere. I tried to push him away and get up. I was just doing everything, trying to kick, punch, but everything I did, he just did it so much harder. I think when I stopped struggling and fighting, he asked me if I had enough, and I think I just remained motionless, and so he released his hands. He started pulling off my clothes.
The victim described the assault she endured at the hands of the defendant.
At some point on the night of the 11th, were you sexually assaulted?
Several times.
How were you assaulted?
In every way imaginable.
Great faces 23 counts, including aggravated murder and kidnapping. If convicted, he could face the death penalty. For Law and Crime, I'm Rachel Stockman.
So we're going to be covering the closing arguments in this alleged serial killer case of Shawn Great. So let's analyze it a little bit more. I'm here with criminal defense attorney Jonna Spilbor and also sex crimes prosecutor Stacey Honowitz. It's great to have both of you ladies here on the program.
Thanks, Jesse.
All right, Jonna, let's first start with you. We expect closing arguments today. The defense hasn't put on a case. They barely cross-examined any witnesses. They didn't provide an opening statement. Do they provide a closing statement, a closing argument today?
You know, I don't see how they don't. I mean, they really should. That's the least they can do for their client. Now, look, we all know that they don't have really a great defense. They're going to be lucky if they save their client from the death penalty. He's sick. He's heartless. Didn't they also, he pled guilty to numerous counts, but not the worst ones in the indictment. So I'm not sure what their strategy is here, but I think they know they don't have a shot at an acquittal.
Stacey, you think this is a slam dunk case for the prosecution? You think it's going to be an easy day for them with their closing arguments?
Well, we never like to say that we ever have a slam dunk because, as you know, you never know. But it's a really good case for the prosecution. the jury had the opportunity to actually hear from someone that survived this. So to hear about this through the eyes of someone who went through it and then the bodies were discovered, they have to give a closing argument. They have to get up and say something, but they know deep down in their hearts that there's really nothing that's going to get their client off.
Not just bodies discovered, decomposed bodies were found in this man's house. Does it get any more unreal than this, ladies and gentlemen? So we are going to be covering the Shawn Great case, and there's a lot to talk about, including what he pled to, guilty to, what he didn't plead guilty to, where this case is going to be going, because it is split into two parts, the guilt or innocence phase, and then it is the sexual violent predator specification phase. How serious were these crimes? We'll talk about that a little bit later. But I want to actually switch gears right now and play for you something from last week that we covered here on Law and Crime. As you know, we were covering the Gloria Williams case. Now, this woman pled guilty to the kidnapping of a baby. That's right. She posed as a nurse, stole a baby from a hospital, took that baby home, and raised that baby as her own for the last 20 years. She pled guilty. Now it is her sentencing hearing. That's what we covered last week. What will she ultimately face? What kind of punishment? Well, Miss Williams took the stand herself and tried to explain what happened when she stole this baby. This is some testimony from last week.
Did you speak to?
Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network and Law and Crime on Sirius XM Radio. That was Gloria Williams, the woman who pled guilty to kidnapping a baby from a hospital, taking that baby home, raising her as her own daughter for the last 20 years. Now that is her sentencing hearing. What will her punishment be? And she could face anywhere from no prison time to up to 22 years in prison on at least the kidnapping charge. She also pled guilty to an interference charge, which carries an additional 5 years. And that was the woman herself explaining why she did what she did. I want to bring in again criminal defense attorney Jonna Spilbor. Jonna, that's an amazing to hear. You hear this. So how does the judge, who ultimately will decide her punishment, feel sympathy for her, or maybe not sympathy? What did you get from that?
Well, she's probably one of the most sympathetic defendants around, right?
You believe that?
I do. I want to believe that. And here's why I'm saying that, though. Obviously, it's not okay to steal babies. I get that. But she's explaining, it's almost like she committed this crime because there was some sort of greater good. That doesn't take away what she did. That doesn't mean she shouldn't be punished for it. But she was trying to do a good thing when she, in fact, did something that's really horrible. Now, here's what we haven't seen, though. Typically, when you plead guilty and you're going to testify on your own behalf at sentencing, you have at least a clue as to what the judge plans to do with you, what type of sentence he or she plans to mete out. So I don't know. I'd be hard-pressed to say that this judge is going to give her the max, because I think had that been the case, we wouldn't be seeing her testify right here. She might have gone to trial, for example. She wouldn't have pled guilty. So I think the judge is going to exercise a little leniency here.
Well, maybe that may be what happens, but let's not forget Shannara Mobley, who's the biological mother, the real mother of this young girl. When she provided testimony in the courtroom the other day, she said she thinks Miss Williams deserves the death penalty. So it kind of gives you a good stance about where she's going. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we are going to go live into the Shawn Great case out of Ohio. This alleged serial killer who's on trial for many different crimes, including the murder of 2 women. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to Law and Crime and Law and Crime on Sirius XM Radio. Everybody, you're watching a feed into and listening to a feed into the Shawn Great case out of Ohio. These are the closing arguments by the prosecution against this alleged serial killer, the man who is on trial for murdering 2 women and raping and abducting a 3rd. And you're really hearing the prosecution go after him, really hearing it. And it's been amazing to listen to. Real quick, before we go to our break, I want to just bring in Stacey Honowitz, our sex crimes prosecutor for this morning. Stacey, what do you make so far of the prosecution's closing arguments?
Look, I think he's doing what every good prosecutor needs to do, and that's to kind of weave a theory as to why you need to find this defendant guilty. And certainly he has a lot, his job is a little bit easier than a lot of other prosecutors because he's got a lot of evidence to back it up. And in this case, he wants the jury to know that he planned, he plotted, he knew what was going on. And so he does what you're supposed to do. He takes the facts of the case, the facts that came out in trial, and then he goes right back to what his theory is. Listen to these facts, and now you know why he plots. He's cunning. It's premeditated. He knew what he was doing. He planned. And that's very powerful. When you have the ability to take the facts and then go back to what your theory is each and every time, you're planting it, you're implanting it in the minds of the jurors that when they hear these facts back in the jury room and they deliberate, they go right back to that theory. This is why we know he plotted, he planned, and he premeditated the murders of these two people.
Yeah, the prosecution is delivering a very strong closing argument. The question is, what will the defense do, if anything? We'll take a short break. We'll be right back. All right, everybody, you're watching and listening to the closing arguments right now in the Shawn Great case out of Ohio, this case about this alleged serial killer. I'm here again with criminal defense attorney Jonna Spilbor. Jonna, what are you making of the prosecution's closing arguments? It's pretty strong.
He is very methodically laying out the elements of premeditation so that there's no question in the jury's mind that this was planned, this was plotted, this was no accident, this wasn't heat of passion, he didn't snap. This was what he set out to do. He's not nuts, and convict him.
Cold, calculating murderer. That is what the prosecution has painted Shawn Great as. Let's go back live into the courtroom. This is, again, the closing arguments in the Shawn Great case. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as we listen to the closing arguments in the Shawn Great case, what the jury and what you are listening to is the audio tape confession from the defendant explaining how he committed these crimes and how he strangled this woman. Again, I want to bring in sex crimes prosecutor Stacey Honowitz. What are you making of this? I mean, the prosecution is literally using the defendant's own words against him in court.
Well, there's nothing more powerful for a prosecutor than to be able to use the words of the person who's on trial. And this is why it makes this closing argument so powerful. When you have the ability to talk to a jury, try to persuade them, then shut it down, and don't listen to what I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen. Hear it from the defendant himself. And he silences and he plays part of the confession. That is so powerful in a courtroom. You don't get as much when you're kind of outside, but when you're sitting there and you're listening to this defendant's own words, it really makes a huge impact. So I think this prosecutor is doing what every prosecutor kind of hopes to do when they have the words of the defendant themselves.
Well, what he's hoping for is that the jury ultimately convicts Shawn Great of all the crimes. Again, he faces a 23-count indictment, and he already pled guilty to 15 of those charges. All right, ladies and gentlemen, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be back live into the Shawn Great courtroom, and we are also going to cover the murder trial of William Riley Gall out of Tennessee. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network and Law&Crime here on Sirius XM Radio. You are watching and listening to the Shawn Great murder case out of Ohio. This alleged serial killer who's on trial for numerous crimes, including the murders of 2 women and the abduction and rape of a 3rd. Joining me on set is criminal defense attorney Jonna Spilbor. I think the prosecution really nailed the point right there, talking about one of the bodies being found and how the doctor said, this is not natural circumstances. I mean, this is a common sense case where you have so much evidence against the defendant.
You don't need a jury instruction for that. You didn't need an expert testimony for that. That really is common sense.
Well, what about those specifications? Because it's not just murder, or rape. There's specifications designed into each of that. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, I mean, the jury has to connect all of these dots. And what the prosecution is doing right now is he's taking the specific evidence that he wants the jury to connect to the specific jury instruction. And that part of this is going to be easy. This is not an easy case, Jesse, in that horrific facts, death, rape, disgusting facts. But in terms of prosecuting it, this prosecutor really has, it's there. All the evidence is there. And all he needs to do is make sure that the jury now knows what pieces to connect to each instruction. And it's as close to a slam dunk on the guilt phase as you can get.
Well, it's going to be hard for me to ever forget it. I think it's going to be hard for you to ever forget these facts, and it's definitely going to be hard for the jury to ever forget these facts. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll go live again into the Shawn Great case out of Ohio. Welcome back, everybody. You are listening live right now to the Shawn Great case out of Ohio, this accused serial killer who's on trial for numerous crimes, including the rape of 3 women. So again, I'm here with sex crimes prosecutor Stacey Honowitz. From your perspective, how does this case differ from other ones that you've covered?
Well, there's a slew of evidence in this case. You know, lots of times we go to trial and we don't have a confession. We don't have the surviving victim to come in and talk about it. We don't have the crime scene, you know, the crime scene that we have here. So that's the difference. And I think that this prosecutor, you know, all prosecutors operate differently in the courtroom. I think this prosecutor doesn't need to stand up and shout and scream because the evidence is there. All he needs to do, like John said, is put it together, put the pieces together. Here's the evidence, here's the law, and use your common sense. And I think the one line that he said about deception was so great. You know, he took her upstairs, but if she thought she was going to be killed, we don't think she would have gone up. And that's really the bottom line. That's the common sense kind of approach to all this. Go back there, take the evidence, take the law, and use your common sense. When you come in the courtroom, we tell you to leave your prejudice and your bias outside, but one thing you have to bring in is your common sense, and in this case, it's right there.
Stacey, you said it so well. One of the most disturbing aspects of this case is that, according to the prosecution, according to the words of Shawn Great himself, the defendant, he wanted to set these women free. And when you look at an alleged serial killer and trying to understand what's the connection between these three victims, you could say they're vulnerable, they needed help, and he thought that he was doing something good for them. Really disturbing to hear, ladies and gentlemen. But again, we are covering the Shawn Great case out of Ohio. This man is facing a 23-count indictment. He already pled guilty to 15 of those 23 charges. However, the murder charges are still on the table. That means the murder charges of Elizabeth Griffith as well as Stacey Hicks, those are still on the table. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a death penalty case, which means if the jury finds him guilty, then they ultimately have to decide what will his punishment be. We have a live feed into the courtroom. Let's go back to the prosecution's closing arguments in the Shawn Great case. Welcome back to Law and Crime here, ladies and gentlemen. We're covering the Shawn Great case. I'm here with criminal defense attorney Jonna Spilbor. Okay, so now the jury in the prosecution's closing arguments is watching. They're watching the defendant himself showing how he killed one of the women. I mean, what is this? How is a serial killer case or alleged serial killer case or this kind of murder case different from other kinds of murder cases?
Well, first of all, there is no greater or better evidence than what the jury is seeing right now. When you hear the words come out of a defendant's mouth, and not only that, they're seeing this. It's on video. You get to see his face. You get to see his affect. You get to see his movement. It's there. There's no disputing this type of evidence, and it's just been laid up for the jury. It makes their job a little bit easier.
So let's say he's found guilty. Next phase is what is his punishment ultimately be, right? So eventually we're going to get to that. This is a death penalty case. Right. How on earth do the defense here, because they really haven't done much in this case so far, what do they do to try to say, you know what, jury, sentence him to life in prison, but not the death penalty?
Well, maybe their lack of building a case in the case in chief means that they are saving it all for the penalty phase of this case. Maybe that's where the rubber's going to meet the road. Perhaps they'll have experts come in and testify as to his mental state. What's wrong with him? Is he wired wrong? Why he maybe, I don't know, couldn't formulate the proper intent, and the better place for him is not the death penalty, but in some sort of facility, prison facility where he can get treatment. I don't know where they plan to go with it. They sure didn't show their cards in the guilt phase.
Well, let's bring in a different perspective. Again, we have sex crimes prosecutor Stacey Honowitz here. Stacey, what do you think if he's ultimately convicted of all these crimes, and wouldn't be surprised if he is, what happens then during the determination about his punishment? Is it really trying to understand what's in the mind of Shawn Great, what he may or may not suffer from mentally?
They really have no other choice. I mean, when you think about it, what could you possibly argue? What mitigating factors are going to go into a death penalty phase with this guy? I mean, all those people that watch Law and Order and all those shows that hear about these things, this kind of case that you're showing your viewers and your listeners is unprecedented. To be able to see him, like John said, standing there in his jail garb, demonstrating how he killed someone is unbelievable. So when they go into the penalty phase, there's going to be nothing left but to say that he has some kind of mental defect, but it's not going to work. I mean, you have so much overwhelming evidence here, and him speaking himself about what he did, it's going to be an uphill battle, and I can safely assume that he would probably get the death penalty in this case.
Not an easy job for his defense attorneys, that's for sure. All right, ladies, Jonna Spilbor, Stacey Honowitz, it was great to have you both on. Thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime, and we can't wait to have you back.
Always a pleasure.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going back right now into the Shawn Great case. The prosecution is continuing to deliver the closing arguments.